This is the meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel. In the absence of a chair, the first item will be the election of a chair for this meeting. Could I invite nominations, please?
Can I nominate Councillor Will Simpson, please?
Is that seconded?
I'll second that.
I
can't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It's a good start. I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Kircher. All those in favour? That's carried. I'll hand over to you, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much. What a wise decision you've made, comrades. Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. Before we start on the formal agenda, I'd just like to remind members that we've all received an invitation to a visit to the Energy for Waste plant, which will be taking place on the 27th of September. Members have attended these previously. I believe Councillor Taylor went to one perhaps last year or very recently and had raving reviews of it. So however boring a tour of an Energy for Waste plant might sound, it actually isn't. So if you are able to go and would like to, please do respond to the invitation, because once we know how many members we've got from this panel, we can potentially open it up to other members as well. So whether it's one way or the other, please do let officers know. First official item on the agenda is the membership of the panel. We haven't received any apologies. I'll just look around to check that that's right. Excellent. Second is the minutes from the previous meeting. Can we have a proposer to accept the minutes of the meeting from the panel that was in attendance? Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. Is that seconded? And Councillor Bamford, everyone's happy, I think. Yes? Excellent. Declarations of interest. I don't believe members have any, but if you do, please make sure that you do them and provide the form to the monitoring officer if you haven't done so already. Item 4, this meeting is taking in place in public, in line with the text as per the agenda. 5th, deputations and petitions. I don't believe we have any, but I'll just look around and check. No. And public questions. I don't believe we've got any of those either. Excellent. Thank you very much. So just before we go into item 7, first I want to congratulate the 2 new cabinet members who have joined the scrutiny panel today. Thank you very much both for being here. Both of these items relate to Councillor Lowe's new portfolio, so I thought I'd just give an opportunity for Councillor Lowe to introduce herself to the panel in her new role.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for being too keen at the beginning. I just want to say that it is an honour to be asked to be the new Cabinet Member for Environment, as the environment is something that I am really passionate about. Yes, I am a tree hugger. Some people label me in my ward as the dog poo lady in my battle against tackling dog fouling. And I hate fly tipping. Oh, does my head in. So yes, I'm really passionate about the environment, which we all should be. Obviously, this role is very new to me, and I have seen that it is a very big basket that I am carrying. So I don't intend to use the overused cliche of I am going to hit the ground running, because that is what I want to avoid. I don't want a bloody nose. It's a steep learning curve, which I will navigate slowly and carefully. I'm not going to rush things, because there was a wonderful comment on the TV the other day, and someone said that haste is waste. So I am not going to rush. I'm going to take things very steady. I am very fully aware of the challenges that we do face in this very cold financial climate. So I'm obviously still very green behind the ears, which is really good for a cabinet member, I think, holding the portfolio environment. I have worked with some of the officers before. Some of them is probably dreading it again. I will. But I'm obviously looking forward as well to working with the new officers, and I'm sure that we will get on fine and do the best that we can. So thank you.
Thanks, Gwen, and I'm sure everyone on this panel will help you along with some constructive feedback every meeting. So, item 7 is the reprofile of Kirklees Resource and Waste Strategy 2021 to 2030, and Natalie and Will be speaking to this, so I'll hand over to them.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just set out a little bit of context before Natalie does all the hard work on the presentation. So obviously we have an adopted waste strategy, which is a number of years old now. That waste strategy was built on delivering a 12-month and a 5-year pledge. There's been some delivery on that we'd like to update on, but then there's also been some changes both in the financial climate and within the government climate as well, in terms of what we're expecting to come into place and when, in order to help fund some of the elements that we committed to. We are also due to go out to re-procurement soon for our waste disposal contract, so we thought it's timely to come back and just recommit to what we were looking to do over the next 12 months and next 5 years. So we thought it was a good opportunity to also update on what we had delivered as well, because there's a lot of hard work that's gone in and a lot of good work that we just want to summarise. So I'll hand across to Natalie, who will go through in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Will. So just as Will mentioned there, today we're doing an update to the strategy based on the financial climate having changed quite significantly since that was launched in 2021. So today I'm just going to go through what those updates are, as well as some of the great things that we've delivered. So going through what we've delivered since the strategy was approved in 2021, we have a composting scheme which is available to residents. So residents can order a composter at a subsidised price. They can either have up to a 70% discount if they're in receipt of council tax reduction, or a 40% 40% discount if they're for all residents out there. So we have a good amount of orders coming through there. We have a steady number of about 20 orders each month, and we had a peak of 73. So that's been going really well. We also introduced plastic pot tubs and trays onto our green bin recycling service, so residents can now place the plastic pot tubs and trays into their green bin for recycling. We did a bit of an update to this last year, just to say that we've collected a large amount of plastics as part of this scheme, around 157 tonnes that was last year, of additional plastics that are now being recycled each year. And as you can see there, last year residents also received a handy leaflet that we created at the same time, which just outlined exactly what everyone can recycle and where, just a handy little guide for residents to have. We've also introduced a bookable bulky waste collection service. So prior to this, if residents had bulky waste they wanted to collect in, they'd make a booking through the system, and then there'd be up to a 12-week wait for them whilst that was collected. What we changed now is that they get a dedicated slot. So it's a little screenshot on there of what that looks like when they come through. They'll be able to see this screen, and we'll select a date then, and they know exactly when to put their waste out, and it's not sat around waiting to be collected, especially mattresses and things like getting wet. They know exactly what day it's going to be collected, and we've had great feedback from that launching. We've also completed a trial on on-street recycling. So these are for litter that's on street. These were placed outside of schools, so we targeted schools specifically because that's where we've been doing a lot of engagement work in the schools. So we tested out the recycling bins outside to see what the impact of those would be. We also did some things in the trial where we tested out some new kinds of signage, which is just a bit of an example up there that you can see. We're just at the moment completing and finalising the results of that trial, but as it stands at the moment, the most up-to-date figures I've got, that we've seen quite high contamination still in those. I think there was about 80% contaminated waste in there, which is a shame, but we're looking at sort of a phase 2 now, what we're doing the next stage of that as well. This is a picture from our Recycling Heroes Award last year. So this is a new scheme that we launched, recognising those in the community that are making headways in terms of recycling, reuse, anything like that. Residents can nominate people, and we have 4 categories available. So we have a recycling hero, we have a business recycling hero, a schools recycling hero, as well as a young person's recycling hero for anyone under 16. We're just in the moment of planning out our 2024 awards for that as well. So get the word out there if you know anyone want to nominate, or spread the word about that. Nominations are now open, and we're already seeing a lot come through, and that's going to be held via ceremony. Is going to be held in November later on this year. We also launched a dedicated schools and business recycling service. So prior to this launching, we only offered general waste collections as part of our trade waste service. We now offer recycling to businesses and schools. And we've had a really great number of customers on there. I think we're just over 400 at the moment. We've had a really great response to that. There's a good mixture of schools and businesses on there too. And in the whole time that it's been running, we've only had 6 contaminated loads of recycling. And in the last 12 months, we've had 0, which is excellent. and it's resulted in over 560 tonnes of additional recycling being collected through the trade waste service. And the picture I've got there at the bottom is just to highlight the work we've been doing of engagement in schools. So our advisors go into schools, and that's one of our recycling officers there, Stacey, the board game he created in the schools with children, just going and providing that education that we do. We also completed a glass trial, which is something that we committed to delivering in our strategy in 2021. We're just finalising the findings of these, but this was to provide a glass collection service to some selected properties, just to understand a little bit more about how that works and what that could look like. Like I said, we're just finding on the outcomes of that trial at the moment. It lasted for 6 months, and we had a mixture of both domestic and trade properties as well. We resulted in roughly around half a tonne of glass being recycled through there, and we had minimal contamination, which is great. So we're just finalising the outcomes of that now and then working out what the next steps for that could be. We've also launched a reuse shop in Huddersfield Town Centre. So we first of all launched our donation points on our 2 household waste sites in Emerald Street, Huddersfield, and Weaving Lane in Dewsbury. So residents can take items which may have gone into household waste site. These can now be diverted into our reuse shop, and the physical shop opened in February this year, I believe, and we've had great success. If everyone's around after the meeting, it's up in the bus station up there. It's a great facility, and we've seen a record number of footfall coming through there. It's surpassed all our expectations and done really, really well. So much so that we're actually struggling to keep up with the demand and the stock in the shop. And our partners Revive are having to source extra stock from their stores in Leeds to keep up with the demand. So as I go through the update to the strategy, one of the things that we've got in there is about increasing the donation points so that we can keep that stocked up and continue to provide those low-cost items to residents in Kirklees. So moving back to the strategy, this is just outlining what the outcomes of the strategy were when we launched it back in 2021. And what I'll do here is I'll focus in on some of the ones that have got some targets and dates associated to them. So we had a target to meet 70% of recycling at our household waste and recycling centres by 2025. As it stands at the moment, our most recent figure for 22-23 was around 49 to 50%. Now we have 5 household waste sites across the borough. Some of those are, this is an average of all those 5, so some perform slightly higher, some perform slightly lower, and 49% is the average for that on there. We have a target to meet 55% recycling of municipal waste by 2025. Our household recycling rate for 2022-23 was 26.3%. That's still a provisional figure at the moment, as it has to go through lots of checks and be ratified before it's confirmed. That's the most recent figure. And I do on the next slide have a graph just outlining our figures and what they look like in comparison to the national averages. We also had on there to achieve a 90% diversion from landfill. That's one that we've met and achieved already. So our rate for 2022-23 was 91%. So as we're going through the strategy and the updates to that, we're actually looking to increase that and push that a little bit further and achieve a higher diversion from landfill on that one. So this is just the graph, and I apologise if it's a bit small and you can't see it on the screen. It just outlines our figures compared to the national average. So the blue line you can see there at the top, that's the national average of household recycling rates, and the green line at the bottom is the Kirklees rate. What I've got on there is a 55% figure with the dotted line just showing sort of where our target was and where we wanted to meet. And what I also have on here is just pointing out that as we previously mentioned, that a lot of strive in the update to this strategy is that we're waiting for a lot of legislation and stuff from central government to be confirmed. So there's something called the extended producer responsibility, the deposit return scheme, and some things around collection consistency and food waste funding. This year we were meant to be expecting a lot of funding coming in around those elements, which is why we set our targets where we did. There was meant to be quite a lot happening this year. However, those have now been delayed or unclear, and we're not sure about, which has caused us to, alongside the financial pressures, to have to take a look and reprofile the strategies to where we were going. But it's just to point out there, why we put the figures where we did and what we were planning on happening from there. The other thing to point out on here is that as part of the national average figures over the last few years, the national average was also starting to decline slightly. And so what they've done on the national reporting is there's tweaked what's included in the figures slightly, and to things like the bottom ash from our incinerator, things like that are included in the national figure but not in the local one. So what I have next is just to show you that if we were also to include all of the materials that we do recycle, including the bottom ash from the incinerator, this is what it could look like. So the blue column here is, that's the Kirklees national rates that were on the graph before. And the green bar here is what our rates would be if we included absolutely everything that we do recycle. Unfortunately, with the parameters they set, we're just not allowed to include those at the moment. But if we were, that's where we would be. So much closer to the national average as well. So in terms of the targets, as I mentioned before, we are a little way off on some of those, and given that we're not receiving the funding now that we'd expected to receive at certain points, we're having to take a relook now. We want to just slightly revise those and push them forward. What we don't want to do is lose the level of ambition that we've got. So although we're going through this period of uncertainty, we want to retain the level of ambition. We just need to sort of relook and think of where we're going to meet those. So we still want to keep our recycling rate of 70% our household waste sites by 2030. And so that's just pushed a little bit further on. And then we've got for the household waste recycling sites, and sorry, I'll just explain the municipal waste there. In the national strategy, they changed what's categorised in terms of the targets from just household waste to include all business waste as well, which is municipal waste. Hence why we brought on the recycling onto our trade waste service, so when that change did happen, we weren't just bringing lots of general waste in, we also had recycling into that figures as well. So we still want to keep level of ambition, and we've pushed that to 65%, but by 2035, in the hope that then by that point some of the funding will get more clear in terms of things coming through. And then as I mentioned before, we want to push even higher on our diversion from landfill rates, so we want to achieve 95% on that one by 2030. So this is just an outline, and I appreciate probably it's quite small on the screen here, but this is just an outline of some of the projects that we've got as part of the strategy. So the projects down the left-hand side in the slight blue colour there, they're all projects that are in the strategy at the moment, which was sent round with the agenda. And so they're things that are in there at the moment, and we're going to continue to deliver. Some we're going to do a little bit earlier, but they're all stuff that are already contained within there. The stuff in the green column in the middle is new things that we think we can deliver that aren't in the strategy at the moment, and some new things that we want to deliver through this period of uncertainty. And then we've got some things down the side down the grey there that you can see, things that we're a little bit unsure about. So these are things that are quite heavily linked in terms of the funding that we're receiving, and we're also going through this period of uncertainty. We're not sure at this moment in time sort of, when the funding is going to come through and which ones of these we can sort of implement as we go through. So in terms of what this is going to look like in terms of us putting it out there, what we'd like to do, as Will mentioned in the opening there, when we launched our strategy in 2021, we made a 12-month pledge to say that in the first 12 months of delivery, this is what we were going to achieve and deliver with our next 5 years aspirations. As we're going through this period of uncertainty, what we're going to be doing is committing each year now to a 12-month pledge, just as we go through to know for the next 12 months, what are the projects and stuff that we want to deliver in the next 12 months. As well as setting out over 5 years the things that we'd like to deliver based on, the funding and stuff coming through as we go through this period. So what I'll do is I'll focus in on a couple of these, and I'm happy to take questions at the end if anyone's got any more questions on any of these in here. But I'll just pick out a few just to explain some. So we've got more reuse and repair workshops. So at the moment, we know that there's lots of great things happening across the district in terms of offering reuse and repair. We want to make sure we partner up with people where we can, play quite a publicising role in terms of letting people know about those, what's available, where they can take things, what they can do with them. We've also got a community grant scheme that we'd like to introduce. So this links quite nicely to that one as well, that there may be lots of initiatives that communities and residents want to set up and create, but maybe just need a slight little bit of funding in order to do so. So we're going to create some small pots of funding available to communities to create any sort of initiative that they've got around recycling, reduce, waste reduction, anything like that. They can bid for it and come into a small pot of money for that. We've also got vape collection points. So since we've been doing this project, I can't help spotting them everywhere now, but they do tend to be quite a bit of a problem in terms of littering across the streets. And they're also quite highly linked to causing fires at household waste sites. So the type of waste they're technically classed as a small electrical. So if you go to the household waste site, you can put them in a small electricals bin. However, as we know, we've got batteries inside, so they're known to be causing a risk of, I think there's been a couple recently, of them creating fires in household waste sites. So what we want to do there is create some vape collection points, so that residents have a place across the district to take these and they can be recycled, and we're taking them out of household waste sites and hopefully helping with the litter of those as well. And that'll be accompanied with a comms campaign, because we'd like to promote the reusable ones more over disposable. We do even have the option for disposable ones to go to. We've also got the Borough Bank scheme. So this is based on an idea that Wales run. They have a physical bus that goes around to deliver this scheme. But again, linking into the reuse and repair workshops, that if people are learning skills to be able to repair things and reuse them before they dispose of them. What the Borough Bank scheme does is make items available that may potentially be able to assist with that. So just to give an example, if you want to fix, I don't know, like a lawnmower or something, you don't want to get rid of it, but you need, I don't know, like a drill or something to do that. In a cost of living crisis, you know, if Joe's an expensive bit of kit, potentially only used once, the Borough Bank scheme would make items such as that available for people to borrow, and in building in that community capacity to be able to actually conduct the repair and things like that for themselves there. So we've got some ideas around that. Like I said, Wales have got a physical bus. We've also had the idea that, you know, potentially we could link in with libraries. I think in some of our meetings so far, we've had, you know, borrow a book, borrow a drill, sort of thing there. There's an existing facility for people to potentially go to on that. We've got the reusable nappy scheme. So this is offering residents potentially vouchers to purchase reusable, like cloth nappies instead of disposable ones. We see it as a double-edged issue for us in waste, where they contaminate our green bins, which again, contamination comes with a great cost to the authority, and they're also in grey bins. They're very heavy materials, so like in terms of you know, our tonnage and taking that through, very, very heavy waste. So if we can encourage people to move to more sustainable options and reusable ones, it'll help with both of those things really there. And as I mentioned before, we've got the expanded reuse shop donation points too. So we're wanting to expand the donation points that are available so people can make more donations in more areas and keep the shop stocked with those low-cost items that people are finding really useful to be able to get at such a cheap price. And then over the next 5 years, everyone's we've got, you know, said we'll deliver the next 12 months. They're the ones that we're committing to over the next 12 months. And then over the next 5 years, we've got some aspirations for things that we'd like to do, such as delivering like a scrap store, which is the idea about, you know, it's like one man's waste, another man's treasure. Some place of a scrap store where you've got bits of offcuts and you've been doing fabrics and all that sort of stuff, where it can go into a scrap store and be made available for people. We've also got safe food resource packs as well, so helping people manage food better, how to shop and budget and that sort of thing. Creating some resource packs available on the back of our successful workshops that we've held so far. And then this is just to point out some of the overarching risks and dependencies that we've got in terms of delivering our strategy. So as I mentioned previously, we are quite reliant at the moment on government legislation and what's coming through from there. So we've got the collections consistency, which is about mandating what materials councils have to collect across the country. Extended producer responsibility, which is working with companies and making sure they use more sustainable packaging and things like that, as well as the deposit return scheme. So the idea behind that one is if you have a plastic bottle that you bought from Coca-Cola, you take it back to some sort of vending machine I think we've had in the past, and you'll get 5p back as a coupon if you take that back. So there's a lot of uncertainty around those in terms of most key the funding that we'll be able to get from those schemes. And then also for us as a risk is the resulting waste streams that are left. So if all these come into place, such as a deposit return scheme and EPR and things, I think the packaging and stuff that we're going to be left with as an authority to treat is going to be more difficult stuff to treat. So it's a risk there about what that looks like, our waste streams going forward. The next 2 points we've got there are just around the financial pressures that we've got. So some of the schemes that we want to deliver come with you know, a huge scale of investment to deliver those, especially given, like I said, that, you know, we've got uncertainties around the level of funding that we'll attract for that, and the ongoing revenue pressures of delivering those on top of that as well. We've got the meeting strategy outcomes. So as I mentioned before, the initial outcomes that we've set, some of those were a little bit way off, so we are looking to revise the outcomes, still keep the level of ambition whilst we go through this period of uncertainty, but making sure that you know, we're being realistic in the meantime and still keeping the level of ambition there. We've got our climate change action plan and environment strategy, so this is just some dependencies in terms of actions that are coming through there. Our strategy runs to 2030. Some of those actions in those plans are further on, so it's just a dependency that we've got there, making sure that we're complementing the strategies across the council. And our ongoing workforce culture change, so just making sure that we're taking our staff and resources along this journey with them. Some of these changes require quite big changes to the way that we operate and things like that, so it's just making sure we take our workforce along that change with us as well. And then we've got staffing and resources. So you may be aware that there's a bit of a national issue around HGV drivers and recruiting those and retaining them. Obviously, if we deliver a revised collection service potentially and increased fleet, things like that, is making sure we can be able to access and provide the right staff and resources to be able to run that going forward. We've also got ageing facilities, so our materials recycling facility, our MRF, down on Emerald Street is obviously an ageing bit of kit now, so it's just going through there in terms of financial pressures as well, but if things go wrong in there and the cost, to be able to keep that running, operating smoothly. We've got the HDEN, which is the Huddersfield District Energy Network. So that's the plan for that is to siphon off energy and heat from the energy from waste plant. So just the dependency on there in terms of how that works and links in with what we're doing. And as Will mentioned, our waste re-procurement, which is coming up shortly as well. And then our depot and fleet capacity, so linking into the staffing and resources that we've got as we want to deliver different types of services. We need to expand our fleet in order to deliver that, but that also means that we need the correct depot spaces and land available in the state to be able to house that and deliver it effectively. And the last slide that I've got here is just our flight path. So it's just showing you where we've been with this, where we've gone. So it's gone through our governance process. We're here at Scrutiny today. And then the sort of next stop on there for us is we're going to Cabinet on the 17th of October. And that's it from me in terms of presenting. So unless Will or Graham wants to add anything on to that.
Thank you very much, Will, but most of all, Natalie, who, as usual, done most of the work. No, I'm joking. No, there's loads of good work in there, and it's really good to hear about all of it, so thank you very much. I think the highlight of the report for me is the very handsome cabinet member on page 20. May he rest in peace. So I can see John's got his hand up. I'm just going to bring Gwen in first as the cabinet member to see if she's got any additional comments, and then we'll move to member questions, and John will come in first then, and if any other members want to indicate, please just let me know. Gwen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've just got some comments that I'd like to make. Obviously, Natalie, thank you for your presentation. Gosh, you whizzed through that, didn't you? No, it's fine. I just want to say thank you for all the great work that you do, Will and the team. So thank you to everybody, especially when we know that there's financial pressures as we speak. And obviously, legislation changes, frustratingly prevents targets being met. And I appreciate that we must work around reducing costs, but I admire your ambition not to wane as you continue to provide the best services that you can, and I'm really proud of all the work that you already do. So like I said, just a few comments. I love recycling. I'm a recycler. I used to play this game with kids that I would give them an item to take out to the bin. They had to decide whether it was green bin or grey bin. So I think it's important that we do catch people young. So going into schools is really, really important. Because in turn, they can then educate their family and their friends. I can remember going into a school many years ago to talk about recycling. And one of the things that we talked about was a discarded quaver packet. Because apparently a rat can live on a discarded quaver packet by licking the grease inside. So there's a vision for you all to take home. So every time you see a quaver packet now, other potato products are available. But yeah, but like I say, that's just a daft fact, but an interesting fact. I've also seen that the reuse shop is really busy because I pass it obviously when I come into Huddersfield. And I'm pleased that you're going to expand on the dropping off points. I'm a member of a national charity, so I hope that naturally that you will be working with other charities and not vying in competition with other charities. Contaminated bins, that is something else that really, really does frustrate me, and I know that we do try to educate people as much as we possibly can about what they can and can't put in their bin. And I had to speak to one of my neighbours a few weeks ago because he decided it was a good idea that on bin collection day to top his green recycling bin with discarded, unwanted holiday flip-flops. So I don't think that was a really, really good idea. So educating people is really, really important. The community grant scheme, I like the sound of that. I'd like some more information on that and I'm sure maybe other members would as well, because I know a couple of groups in my ward that I think would be really interested in doing something like that. One of my bugbears at the moment is discarded vapes. I hate the things. I've never smoked, but vapes, oh gosh, horrible things. And I'm fed up of seeing them discarded on pavements and grassed areas. So hopefully a vape drop-off point might be productive to get people to discard of them correctly. Obviously, the location of where you site these vape recycling bins is important, be it public areas like bus stations, railway stations, and supermarkets, as people are going in to buy a new one, they can dump their old ones, can't they? Discarded plastic bottles, that's another bane on our environment, obviously particularly in mugger courts and play areas. Just wondered if there's any plans on recycling schemes for cans.
Can I just remind members, please, that this is scrutiny, and it is scrutiny members do need time to be able to ask questions of both cabinet members and officers.
Yes.
So
I've nearly-
I'm just wondering.
I've nearly
just
done
wondering.
this.
You know, it is for scrutiny members
Yep.
to
I've
be
nearly done.
asking the
So,
questions if we
yeah.
can. Thank
Yes,
you.
Liz.
Yeah. Maybe next time will I come in at the end to give others a chance. Yeah. Obviously, people would like to see glass collections returned, and also just a couple of comments. Your bulky waste service for booking things to be removed. I used it this week. It's dead easy, so I think that's a really, really good. Just another thing is the brown garden waste bin. I love my brown garden waste bin, but I do know residents have problems actually obtaining one because it's quite a tight window. Sorry, I can email them my other concerns. Is that all right?
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
John, you were first up with your hand, so I'll pass over to you, Councillor Taylor.
Just going to go off mute. Right. Thank you, Liz, for making the points you just made, because I was going to make exactly the same point. Councillor, I welcome you as a new cabinet member, and I wish you well. But you have an opportunity to talk to officers at will as the cabinet member. So all your points and comments you could quite easily make at another time, another place. And it's kind of disrespectful to scrutiny to take up so much of our time. So I accept that you're brand new to this. So hopefully that won't occur again. But your role is to come and listen, not to give a speech. If I can move on to my questions, I'd like to thank Will and Natalie for their presentation. I've got a number of questions, and I'm going to start with a bugbear about recycling, which I have raised, and that's about the Tetra Packs. You know, these plastic, you know, it's like orange juice and things like that, that we can't recycle in our green bins, but we can take to the recycling centres. Well, the recycling centre nearest to me, the one in Upper Cumberworth, and of course today we have every member from Denbydale present, that has been full for over a month, and they've been refusing people and sending people away with recycling. Now, I have raised this, it is being investigated, but perhaps officers need to look at the frequency of which they are currently being emptied, and whether actually the containers you stuff them in are actually big enough to support the demand at the moment. So that's just almost an aside, really. Obviously, I sit on the cross-reference party group. I think that's what we call it. And I'm familiar with a lot of the strategy and have been alongside it throughout and supportive. One of the things we talked about when we were talking about opening the shop in the town centre, the reuse shop, was one of the concerns, and I think Gwen articulated this just now as well, was the impact it could potentially have on local charities. And I'm hoping as part of our review and analysis of how successful we've been, we are making contact with those other charities that have shops locally to see if they've seen any drop off in their donations, which may be a consequence of us promoting our route to, you know, sort of donate items for reuse or recycling. So I just wouldn't mind a comment on that, please. Again, in terms of contamination, there's a comment in about contamination, and again, as a member of that cross-reference group, where we've obviously talked about it a number of times in the past. But what it doesn't tell me at all is what we're going to do about it. And it literally says it's causing concern for our contractor. I'm not surprised it is. It's causing concern for us as well, but there doesn't seem to be any detailed plan, timeline, timescale, or anything about how and when we're going to do something about it. So I'd like a little more on that, please, if I may. I fully understand the reason why we've had to delay the targets. So in a sense, we're not really changing our targets. We're just saying it will take us longer to achieve them, in part because of that uncertainty that's coming from government and that uncertainty that's coming from the financial environment that we're currently operating in. But what I would like to see is a little more detail about what potential improvements we're hoping to have anyway between now and these, you know, if we're looking at some of these dates, they're almost 10 years out. So there ought to be something that says, well, if we're going to get 65% by 2035, what are we going to get to by 2028 or whatever it may be? And then additionally, on the recycling, the pledges. If we look at the pledges on the back, it's just a comment really more than anything else. But one of the pledges says improved litter provision. Well, if I'm a member of the public reading this, I'd be saying I don't want any improvement in litter. Well, I want improvement in litter, but I think that does that not mean improved litter bin provision? And if it does, would that not be a lot clearer to people? And I think that was all of my points. So I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So just to recap on those, I'll summarise them for you. So John's asked about Tetra Packs and the capacity there in terms of collecting them. He's also raised the reuse shop and if we're going to include the assessment of the impact on local charities whilst we're looking at our impact so far. He's mentioned the litter bin pledge, and then I'm going to add something to the contamination and targets points as well, if that's okay. Okay, so can you address those first three first, and then we'll come back on contamination and targets, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. So Tetra Packs, that's actually linked into the collection consistency work, because it is one of the items that government have mooted as being required to be collected at the curbside. But it is quite a difficult material to recycle because it is multi types of material all packed together. We are in discussions with Suez, our current contractor, over what the ability our existing materials recycling facility could do, as that is the blocker in the current contract as to what could happen. But in terms of the facilities on household waste sites, then, you know, my personal view is that the bins should be usable at all times. So that's something I'll take away and I'll pick up specifically, Councillor Taylor, because it's, you know, if someone's taken the effort to get to a site and to recycle it, it should be able to be used in those facilities. So there's clearly been a failing there that we'll pick up separately and outside of this. In terms of reuse facilities and charities, then we engage, you know, very heavily with third sector leaders. Revive, who operate the shop, are not a single charity; they're actually an umbrella that link into a number of other charities as well, such as Vincent de Paul's in Bradford. So we are not looking to supplement, compete. We're looking to actually create more of a network of charity organisations that help each other. You know, as Natalie mentioned earlier, there's some things that are being created in Leeds that are being moved into Kirklees to be sold. So that's the sort of position and model that we want to move forward with. It is under a trial at the moment with Revive. We are looking to expand it into the north as well, under the trial that's been so successful. But we will ultimately have to tender this. And within that tender will be the ability to make sure we set out clearly that we expect them people to work together, charities to supplement each other, etc., and not be a competitive environment. Because you're right, but I think that what it's shown at the moment is the demand and the success of the shop shows the pressures that community and people are under. And the fact that we can't stock it with 2 big sites in Dewsbury and Huddersfield shows that I don't think there's an issue in competing, it's more an issue in some of the wider social pressures that we see. And so I think there's more than enough to go out with everybody. And I'll take your point on the improved litter bin facilities, because that's what it means. We have tendered a new contract. There's better bins going out there that are going to allow for easier use than some of the facilities you will see. You know, some of the bins have been there for quite some time, are quite rusted. So this is about lifting the street environment, but also it is important that we ran those trials on recycling as well. So although we'll start with the general litter, we want to make sure this is a phased approach to look at what potential on-street recycling facilities would be. We specifically looked at schools and things like that, but we want to trial it first because it's a difficult nut to crack in the contamination levels. But we'll take your point on the wording in there, Councillor Taylor, and look at that amendment.
John, if it's on any of those 3, do you want to come back in before we move on to the other 2 issues?
Yeah, it is, if that's all right. I don't think I probably didn't position it particularly well there. On the recycle shop, what I'm worried about is not competing with other charity shops in terms of people going into our shop instead of their shop to purchase things. I'm more worried about a drop-off in donations to the other places like Kirkwood Hospice that is so dependent on this sort of funding, because people find it easier to drop it off at our sites. And that's what I'd be interested in understanding, that we've looked at and made sure that, you know, we're doing the right thing there, if that makes sense.
Thank you, John, for clarifying there. Will, would you want to come back on that at all?
Yeah, we can pick that up in more detail. Like I said, the model we're setting up is that it shouldn't matter where someone's donating it. There's a network of shops and charities that are working together to make sure the right things are in the right places. So Revive, for example, look more at textiles, more at bric-a-brac type materials, not bulky goods. Some other charities focus on bulky goods and larger items. So we want to make sure that it's a complete network, north and south, and that it shouldn't really matter where you drop this off, that it gets to the right place and where that demand is. The trial's been brilliant in building up information, but I think it is an important point that Councillor Taylor makes, that we need to specifically maybe hone in on and get some of that information and data to bring forward.
Thanks, Will. Gary, you indicated next. We're going to move on to the issues of contamination and targets. Is it that on those issues, or shall I bring you in after we've discussed those?
No, it was more about the basis of some of the data presented and some questions around that. So,
okay, can we'll come on to that after we've discussed John's bits on contamination and targets? Excellent. Cool. So John mentioned contamination. I've got sort of similar views as to what John articulated. I mean, do we have a projection of what impact the level of contamination we have at the minute is having on our recycling rate? Because obviously if we're having to not recycle things that could otherwise be recycled due to contamination, do you know what that figure is?
I don't have it to hand at the moment, but I can provide that. We do have that information available.
Yeah, because that'd be really interesting. I think one thing that's really frustrating about it is we know that the vast majority of the contamination that we get in our recycling is from like nappies and food. And we do a lot of education work around when someone puts something in the green bin that shouldn't be there, and they get multiple visits from someone to get a very friendly educational approach. But there are repeat issues at a number of different places, and I think it should be fairly clear to anyone that a used nappy is not something that we are going to recycle in our green bins. And so if it comes not only an impact on our recycling rates as like a percentage of what we're recycling hitting our target, but also we're a massive financial cost. We need to be, in my view, and I assume Councillor Taylor's view, given his comments as well, be taking more stricter action in those circumstances. So that was my comments on contamination. And then just on the targets, one, if you can answer them together. So you got John's point on targets that he raised, and I just wanted to ask, you put the graph up that showed what our actual recycling rate is if you consider everything we recycle rather than just the things that fit the national parameters. In terms of our 55% target, are we aiming on the basis of the national parameters or on the basis of what we actually recycle? And is there therefore, if that's the case, going to be a separate target for what we consider our actual recycling rate to be? So if you can encompass that alongside what John raised on those issues, that'd be great. And then I'll bring Gary in after.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My name's Graham West. I'm the Service Director for Highways and Waste and Street Scene. Just picking up on the point around contamination, and I think listening to members as well, we've got a lot of people out there providing a lot of information and a lot of data. The work that the team are doing already now to provide additional facilities, the household waste, the recycling, the reuse shop are significant. But what we face, similar to many local authorities, is the culture and behaviour of people within the borough. Now this is not just in Kirklees, this is a wider. And I guess it's a call to arms to say that we want people to be able to recycle in an educated and a managed way. But what will we do about this? I think, we have to be very clear, don't we? That if facilities are being provided that are being, and I'm going to use this word, abused, then I think at a point, having revisited, educated, discussed, informed, and warned, then we have no other option other than to look at removing that opportunity for those people to recycle. Now that sounds very aggressive in its approach, but you're absolutely right, Councillor Simpson, that this authority cannot continue to divert loads that should be going for recycling into areas that, it's costing us significantly more. And I will throw a figure out there. We're now on the cusp of, a figure of projecting around £450,000, whereby we're having to divert loads, which should be recycled. Now that's just not sustainable at this particular time. Yeah, that's just not sustainable. So I think the message will be, we will continue with our education at school level, we'll continue with our education for those people that have facilities, but when we get to a point whereby we can no longer sustain that, we will be looking to remove, and I would promote that we'll be looking to remove recycling facilities for those that fail to use it appropriately.
And then you've also got the point around targets as well, if you could address that before I bring Gary in. Thanks, Will. And I'll bring you, John, back in after Gary's had his input.
Mine's relating to the questions we're asking at the moment.
Okay, if Gary doesn't mind, is that okay if I bring John in before you? Sorry. Yeah, sure. He's not happy, John. No, he is, I'm joking.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit onto the contamination as well. So I think what we did have to recognise in tackling the issue is that it's been a pretty difficult 2 or 3 years, hasn't it, for people, and with the cost of living, with COVID, with post-recovery. So we have paused to look at our processes, our systems, how we support people, and we've actually been running a trial more recently about, turning up proactively ahead of the collection day in order to engage with residents, to have that conversation where there's traditionally been perhaps heavily contaminated bins, to essentially look people in the eye and think we have done as much as we possibly can to make sure you understand how to use the bin, make sure you understand what can be recycled, what is causing the contamination, why it's causing an issue, before then we move to take any action, rather than just moving straight to action, because ultimately we want everyone to take part in recycling, don't we, to divert their waste, to minimise their waste. So what we didn't want to do was go straight with draconian measures. So we have been undertaking this trial. We'll review what the outcome of that trial is to see if it's something that has driven behaviour change. And I think, given obviously the financial impact that Graham's articulated, and the current financial environment, and the fact that it impacts on those people who are doing the right thing, and are making those efforts, that we will have to review how we tackle contamination, and we're looking at that as we go towards the end of the year, once we've gathered all that information and data together. In terms of targets, I sort of take Councillor Taylor's point that you'd like to see a bit of a year-by-year incremental, step on where we're moving to, what percentage points we're targeting. One of the difficulties we have sat here today is there is so much uncertainty on some of those big step changes that are due, such as extended producer responsibility, the collection consistency, the deposit return scheme, what funding we will or won't get, when we'll get some capital investment, when we won't get it. It's been delayed till 2025 already. Extended producer, the collection consistency element, which is dictating what we have to collect at the curbside, will not come in until after 2025. They've linked it to the extended producer responsibility legislation now and saying it won't come until that's in. So any delay in EPR means it's going to be delaying consistency automatically now. Means it'd be just almost meaningless, which is why we wanted to move to this. What's the long-term target we want to achieve? What's the next 12 months pledge? What's the next 5-year aspirations? And keep coming back and talking to everyone and updating that as we go. You know, we're not alone in this. Some of our officers attended the Yorkshire and Humber region last week. Every single council's in the same position. Every single council has the same frustrations. Every single council's trying to sort of plan and organise on a bed of sand at the moment. So we're trying to pick the points that we know we're certain of, especially at a time when investment is so important. Because what we don't want to do is invest tens of millions of pounds in a service that we don't end up getting the funding for. And also the legislation change means we're carrying air, because people have taken it to your Tesco's and Morrison's to get the money back instead of putting it in the green bin. But we're left with the physical infrastructure and the long-term costs of that, you know, for decades. And so it's important, I think, that we look at when's the right time to financially invest as the clarity comes.
John, your hand's gone down, but I think you might want to come back in, do you?
Yeah. Just on the targets and the sort of interim measures and things. The thing that worried me of the presentation today, Will, and it might be, Natalie, if you can pull back up the slides. There's a slide that shows our year-on-year recycling performance, and it also shows the national average recycling rates. We can just have a quick look at that. Yeah, I've no idea what. I mean, we've talked a bit about the fact that the ash isn't included in things, but if you look at the blue line and ignore where it is, but it's steady to slightly. It rose in the first period, and then it's been pretty steady ever since. Ours, we rose and then fell, and now we're much further apart from the national than we were 6, 8, 10 years ago. So it doesn't really matter. What's happening nationally is much more consistent than what's happening here. And that's what we need to be talking about. Yes, we're not going to get from 26.3 to 44 until a lot of this uncertainty is removed. But why are they able, whatever they're doing, to maintain it at around 42, 44? And in the same period, we've seen it drop from 34 to 26 and as low as 24, 25. That's what worries me, is we're way off what everybody else is doing, because everybody else, as Will has just said, face all the same challenges around the uncertainty nationally, the financial consequences. I think you're absolutely right about trying to build something on sand, moving sand. But we need to address that point, really. I'll leave it there if that's all right.
Thanks, John. So we've got John's point there about what factors differentiate our trend from the national trend. Gary, I think you want to come in on this issue as well, so I'll bring Gary in now as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. I'm coming into this through what I do professionally. I'm a bit of a data guy who does analysis and stuff, so that I was really focused on the same point as exactly John was making, to be honest. If this data that is presented is a genuine like-for-like comparison with other authorities, it's blindingly obvious that if that's anything like accurate, Kirklees' recycling performance has been for a long time being desperately poor. And my question would be, if I had my old work atoms, I'd be saying, what are these other authorities doing? Have we done benchmarking? Have we done analysis against the authorities that can get an average of 43%? No doubt some even way better. What benchmarking has been done to understand why we're in Kirklees at 26.7 and the average is at 43? And there might even be some authorities out there, I don't know, at 60s maybe. Because without understanding that analysis, I think quite frankly, you're kind of whistling in the wind unless you understand the core root cause of the issue, because clearly there's something there which looks very different. And like I agree with John that a lot of other authorities no doubt have had similar financial issues and difficulties in COVID to deal with. So basically what analysis has been done to the best performance, and are we calibrating our own performance and targets, and could you outline some of the differences that you've actually observed if you've done that? Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. So you've got John's point on what makes up the differential trends, similar question from Gary around what benchmarking we've done, and then you've got my question from earlier about whether the 55% is on national parameters or our actual recycling, and if not, whether we've got a separate target for that.
I'll start with the target one. No, the 65 we were looking at was on national. That's the national indicator, and we'll be looking to compare with the graph that we've got on the screen. So we may actually outperform it in reality, but we'll be looking to get our 26% to the 55%. And no, we don't have a separate target at the moment that sort of wraps in what would be a Kirklees recycling rate. So in sort of a whistle stop of where we've been, in building up the waste strategy to start with, there's a huge amount of work behind that. There is all the, what's the waste flows, what's the comparators, what's the modelling, what are the systems, what sort of waste does Kirklees produce, what's the deprivation levels, that impacts heavily on what is produced. How does that model through and what's achievable? And that all builds through. We've had consultancy and we've had all the background documents that builds into the original waste strategy delivery. The assumptions based in that are some of those that we've touched on today in terms of when we thought investment was coming in and when we thought we'd see that big step in performance. And what I'll do is I'll talk through the graph that will perhaps give you, both Councillor Taylor and yourself, some of those answers. So you see the initial sort of low level that Kirklees started with as we grow into the initial bell. That's when the first waste strategy really came in. That's when we looked at fortnightly waste collection. That's when we looked at rolling out green bins. And that saw that initial peak. As you saw that investment sort of start to end, you can see that slow creep down again. Then the next peak that we're seeing coming up is when we looked at a number of different initiatives. We looked at chargeable bulky waste services. We looked at partnering more with pushing commercial waste out of our household waste sites. There was a number of things that came in around 2015, 2016 that see that second peak come up. Since then, where we see the next big dip is we saw a change in the global markets for recycling. So recycling commodities are internationally traded, and that drives what happens back in the UK. We don't have enough UK reprocessing capacity to deal with our waste. We are reliant on other countries. And what happened in that year is the issue in contamination was surfaced within Kirklees, essentially, because where these markets were, predominantly places like China, undertook what was called Operation Green Sword, where they actually looked at building their own facilities within China, and they stopped importing material. At that point, that meant that there was more competition, and therefore we had to meet much stricter contamination levels and quality levels on what was being reprocessed and what was being recycled. You'll see that is where we actually started to expose what was the underlying issue within Kirklees on contamination of green bins. So that initial drop was caused by that. You can see that when we started to look at some of the actions in place, some of the initial contamination monitoring we did a few years ago, some of the more initiatives, you can see us sort of fighting to come back up again. You saw COVID in the middle of that where it dips again, but we have been fighting an uphill battle on the contamination. But that broadly gives you an idea of where performance could be without contamination, or with the contamination on par with where other authorities are. Similar authorities to similar size, similar demographics are looking in the 15% to 20% mark. We're operating in some of our areas up to 68%. That's giving you the sort of level of challenge we have. But like I said, there's reasons for that. We've been through COVID, haven't we? We've been through cost of living crisis. So what we didn't want to do was sort of come down with a hatchet. We wanted to bring people on a journey with us to have that long-term learning as opposed to just that initial shock. We've done that. We've been doing that over this year. You've seen that's why it's starting to come up. I know Councillor Simpson in his portfolio looked at a graph many times, didn't you, as we were coming through on what was happening, what effect it was having on contamination. But it is an issue that I think we're starting to bottom out now, as doing as much education and work with communities as we possibly can, and there perhaps need to be a bit more measures that come in place that's removing that facility. But we don't want to do it. I want to do it on a measured basis with understanding of what the trials told us, data evidence, etc. That brings on to what's the difference between Kirklees and other authorities. Well, if you compare other authorities in terms of demographics and deprivation, then we are performing very similar in terms of pure recycling. We are producing more waste in Kirklees in some areas. So obviously recycling sits as one in the denominator and the numerator, etc. If you've got more waste being produced, you may be recycling the same amount, but it's giving you a lower recycling performance. So there's some element of that that's playing out. There's some element of we don't recycle as much as everybody else. So Tetra Packs was mentioned. We did bin pots, tubs and trays, but they're quite light materials. The biggest difference between what are the top performers in the country and the bottom performers is things like completely free garden waste, but being in an area that has big gardens. So what you'll see is the top performers tend to be more rural districts where people have much bigger gardens, producing much more green waste, and therefore have a big bump in their performance from it. And food waste. Food waste is the next thing that is showing the top performers being a big change. And that's what we had planned, but that is a significant investment. You know, we're talking tens of millions of pounds in fleet equipment, depot development, millions of pounds in revenue costs. The government did say that there'd be no net burden, but the clarity on that and the money on that has not come yet. But that is a big step change that would have happened here. You will have noted that over that time we also introduced our garden waste service as well. We initially bought that in as a chargeable service. It's been very successful, and the concept of that was that those that do have gardens can have access to a facility to dispose of their garden waste. A lot of our households don't have access to gardens or large gardens, so we had to consider that at the time. The government is looking at legislation to see whether they want to mandate free or allow charge still, so that's another question mark over that service as to what level of performance we may or may not achieve on that. Glass is the next one. We have done a lot of benchmarking and a lot of work with other authorities. It's again similar demographics to see what collection methods do they use, what performance do they have. In very, very high level terms, we are very similar in our bring back performance to some of those councils, but our bring back collection service is a zero cost service to us. So it does not cost us anything. Whilst in order to introduce a glass waste service would cost us £7 million a year, and the performance gain would be only about 3% to 4%, because we don't have a huge amount of glass within our waste stream. So although it's an important thing from a terms of recycling, providing access, gaining it, it is not a game changer in terms of our recycling performance overall. That one is food waste. We have about 40% of our bin is food waste. And so that is the single biggest thing within there, as well as the overall volume that we need to tackle. And that's the thing that we don't have certainty over when we can deliver that, and that will be the biggest step change we can make.
Thanks, Will. John, I'm going to bring you in one final time because I assume it's on what we've been discussing, and I'm going to have to bring other members in.
Yeah, a few comments really. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit less positive on this. You talked about China's greenwash or whatever it was about the waste that they were importing, and I get that, but that wouldn't explain our decline as being any different to what would happen to that blue line, because I assume that would impact on the whole industry, not just on Kirklees. Similarly, when you talked about the cost of living and COVID, neither of them really directly impact on recycling rates. And the thing we haven't said, and I know this from my work on the cross-party reference group is that there is a huge disparity in terms of contamination between the north and the south of the borough. And that's because the council did pursue a policy of removing green bins in the south if they were contaminated, and it was sort of 3 strikes and you're out or something similar, but never did that in the north. So as a consequence, we haven't seen the improvement that we saw in the south, in the north of the borough. And again, whilst you talked about food waste and the garden waste, and I think that does go a large way to explaining the gap between the green and the blue lines. My issue is the green line is going in the wrong direction, and all of the issues we've talked about, other than the fact that we haven't tackled contamination in the green bins, seems to be national issues or, you know, sort of market issues or industry issues, which would impact on everyone to an extent, and therefore wouldn't explain a widening gap between ourselves and the national average. So I think that there's something not right. It still doesn't feel comfortable to me. And I know that tackling contamination in the green bins in the north of the borough is one of the parts of that solution. And we keep talking about it, and we've been talking about it through a cross-reference group for quite a long time now. And it sounds like we're going to be talking about it again because we're doing a little trial and we're waiting for the outcomes, and then we'll see what we do about it. We need to get a bit more assertive, and I'm with Graham on this, that if we don't do something about it, the cost to this authority at a time when we don't have any money, it's difficult to justify. So if you can tell me any other reason other than the green bin contamination, why our performance is worsening in comparison to national, rather than running at a similar level. It seems to me all the other reasons that have been given relate to the industry as a whole rather than a Kirklees specific issue. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I'll bring officers in now and then move on to other members. But I think the contamination point has come through very strongly from, you know, across party. So please do feel free to accelerate any of that. But I'm sure you'll let us know what you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Simpson. Yeah, I've already mentioned my ambition regarding facilities that are being misused, and John picked up on that as well. And clearly we will take that forward, John. I think the other thing is data is always difficult to compare, isn't it? Yeah. And I think we've had a good dig around that. But I think what I'd like to do, Chair, if it's okay, is ask my officers to go back and look at comparing ourselves with other authorities with a similar demographics. Because, of course, the line at 43%, there'll be a lot of the authorities that have invested heavily. You know, I'm not going to name any of those, but there are some significant investments in some areas. And obviously there are people that are already doing curbside collection on glass and food, but it's a cost, as Will's already articulated. We're not at that stage to take that risk in Kirklees until the sand has been stabilised, yeah, and then we can move forward. I don't think there's anybody in this room doesn't want to see those figures a lot better than where they are. But I think we'll take it away and look at how we compare with similar. Because, of course, if it's 43%, there's going to be some at 60, there's going to be a lot at 20, there'll be some in the middle, won't there? And it's just getting where are we in that particular position. It needs to be better, doesn't it? But that will depend on our borough and our residents and our businesses and our communities working with us. And that's what we've got to continue to do. So exactly as Will's saying is, we don't want to be too draconian in this and just remove things. We've got to educate. But again, picking up on Councillor Taylor's point, how long does that take to get to that position? When do we draw the line? Okay, I make no further comments on that, but I just wanted to sort of give that direction. Okay, thank you.
I'll just cover off the blue line point. It did start coming down, and that's when DEFRA changed the calculation in their national figure to remain it going upwards. And that's when they added the things where Natalie showed the comparator table, that if we then did the calculation that DEFRA now do, it would show us on a significantly higher percentage, because the bottom ash goes for metal reprocessing, it goes for recycling into bricks. We do the same for our street sweepings, that we float off the aggregate, so that goes for recycling. But we're not allowed to do the same calculation. If it was stripped back and if it was like for like across all that table, it would show the blue line coming down at the same time our line was coming down, that the national impact of these changes hit. But I think Councillor Taylor's point's correct, that it was hit harder here because of the level of contamination and the challenges that we face here. So it hit us harder because the other material in the other authorities was kept, and ours was the one that wasn't, because of the condition of it.
Thank you very much. Matthew, you were next with your hand up, and then I'll bring Hannah after you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for coming today and for the presentation. Very interesting, and it is good to see the things that we have achieved and managed to achieve despite the difficulties. And just before I sort of get on to my questions, I'll say you should see John when he's well. The first point I'd like to make, and it's unfortunate that I start with this, it's more of a comment than a question, but it's the second meeting in a row I've said this. I don't find the detail in this report adequate for scrutiny. We've got, most of it is the original report from the 2021, which I remember passing at full council, which was was the plan. But the purpose of this report is there are going to be changes to that, and significant shifts and new information has come to light. But there are a total, being generous, 4 pages of A4 in this report, none of which has any real detail in it about what the new schemes are, what they mean, what the timescales are, what we've actually lost, what is the actual cause of delay, basically the detail that we need to have in order to do our job and to scrutinise. It's a very common problem in my experience on scrutiny that we do not get. Even the slides that we were shown today, they're not in here. Those new tables are not in here. So we saw them was when they were up on the screen. And frankly, we need better to do our job as scrutiny. Instead of spending our time teasing the information out of you as we have done so far, if we had that up front, we could properly analyse that detail and suggest more constructive things rather than just trying to educate ourselves through the meeting. So that's my point. I'll repeat it until it stops being true. Second, in terms of the delays from the national level, I say this at Transport Committee in West Yorkshire quite a lot, where we deal with government uncertainty on a monthly basis. What's the latest from government, and have they bothered to proffer an excuse as to why, given that the original plans were from 2018, which was 4 prime ministers ago, we can't progress? Have they bothered to give us a reason, and what hints are they giving us unofficially that we might be able to work on? Third point, and this is something we agreed as a committee to bring up at every meeting because of the name of the committee, Environment and Climate Change. What will the impact of these delays be on our target of net zero by 2038 as a local authority? We want to push, as a committee, we agreed for that kind of thought to be put into every report that goes through the council. Everything needs to have that thinking in it. Every report needs to have a bit of thought put into how this will help us or hinder us or be neutral in that journey. And finally, just going back to the contamination point before I shut up and let you have a go. Sort of a fundamental point. How confident can we be that it is possible to find out everybody who's contaminating that green bin? Because once it's in the van, it's mixed together and tracking it down to the individual house. But when I watch bin crews do the check, they open the lid, look in for a second, 2 maybe. If it's not on that very top level, there's no way to know because it just gets put in the van. So fundamentally, how are we able to actually enforce on the scale necessary to save ourselves from these, ostensibly poor figures? Thank you.
Do you want to come in before I bring Hannah in? So you got the question on, I think Matthew's made a good point around the fact that we've heard a lot of really, really good stuff, and I think it's been a really informative discussion so far, but having more of that in writing beforehand would have been very helpful, which I'm sure you'll take away. So the question on will it impact net zero performance and the contamination enforcement, if you can pick those up, thanks.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, you know, the more information we can give allows you to do more scrutiny. I didn't appreciate that you'd not had the slides in advance, so we can take that point away. I think you've mentioned that before, whereby slides have not been provided before. And it's key information, isn't it, for you to be able to ask questions in a managed and an informed way. I think you're absolutely right. Anything that is impacting on our targets around net zero, we should make sure that all our reports pick up on the impact of that. And again, working with Cat Armitage in that area on the sustainability strategy and the net zero, to pick that element up is key. So I don't disagree with any of that particular area. Regarding the contamination, how do we know? I was going to hand across to Will there, but we do have officers out there that are doing a detailed assessment of the contents of bins so that we can try and understand what's in there at a lower level. It's not a great job, is it? But it's something that we think we need to invest in because of the urgency and the priority around this. Because of course when your bin's out, someone could drop a contaminated piece of pizza wrapper in there or otherwise, couldn't they? So I think there is all that work going on, but we will take away, Chair, the points about more detail, yeah, presentations up front, and also to make sure that we do give an indication of the impact on our net zero target. Okay.
Councillor McKirker.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I just have one very brief point, actually coming back to the points that Councillor Taylor was making. You mentioned that food waste is one of the main sources of contamination, and obviously you were looking at the costs of introducing food waste collection as a specific recycling stream. Have you factored in the benefit of having specific food waste collection in terms of cost savings, and obviously hopefully reducing contamination because it prompts people to put it somewhere different? I just wondered if that had been factored in. And then two other brief points on your sort of plans for the next 12 months and 5 years. It doesn't specifically mention business recycling. I know you said that the scheme you have running is very successful, but I've certainly been contacted by businesses who want to join and there's no capacity. The last response I had from an officer was that they weren't planning to expand it because they didn't have enough businesses on the list, but the businesses that were coming to me weren't aware that they could ask to be put on a list. So I think there's something needs joining up there. I think if you put a call out, you probably would be able to fill another round of business recycling without a problem. There's certainly an appetite there for it. And also just on the vape collections, which I think is a really positive move because again that's come up locally. But certainly, are you engaging with the businesses who sell vapes? Some of them already run their own collection points, but even if it was just a case of asking them to engage in educating at the point of sale about disposal and pointing people towards not putting it in household waste, I think that would be a positive move as well.
Thank you very much, Hannah. On Hannah's point about the business recycling capacity, I know when we launched the scheme, and it was an incredibly successful launch, we sort of limited it to businesses that were near the schools because we were introducing it to all schools, but not all businesses. If you could let us know whether that's still the case and it still has to be a school near a business, or whether it would potentially be open to any business if we are able to expand the list, because I agree with Hannah. I think if we put a call out, actually there's loads of businesses that want to do it, they just don't know that we can potentially do it. And then you've also got Hannah's points on the vapes and the money around food waste, if you can pick those up. Thank you.
Just on the food waste calculation, it's factored in, but it's marginal. So the contamination amount, so Graham alluded to, around the £450,000 mark. The cost of a food waste collection is looking around about the 5 million revenue, plus the tens of millions in sort of vehicles, equipment, depot, plus containers. So it is a factor, but it's not a significant one. On the businesses, no, we expanded it to all of our trade customers. And so the sort of condition is that you're our trade customer, therefore you have access to the recycling service. We have had some contact us just for recycling, but as you sort of alluded to a bit there, it's about a risk in the current environment, because to expand to a new round would mean there's a potential gap in the customers and covering cost in the immediacy, But I think that's a fair point in how we perhaps look at, similar to we do with the garden subscription service, people can come forward or businesses can come forward and say, I'm interested in your recycling service, can I sign up for interest? And if we get enough, as you said, maybe we can put a day on, 2 days on, 3 days on and going like that. So I think we'll take that away and look at that. And vapes, yeah, we've had some engagement with sort of national campaigns, with RAP as well we've engaged with. But I think it's a good point to make sure that we still look at those local businesses that may not be captured in those as well, just to make sure that we're either signposting, engaging with, and not cutting across perhaps some of those collection points. I think it's a good point to take away.
Just on the business waste, thinking like if we could have some kind of pre-order system where people are, you know, not just expressing an interest, but you know, saying there's some sort of level of commitment there where we say, you know, next time we come to expanding this, you're X on the list, and then we know exactly how many people are signed up, and as soon as we hit a certain number, it's viable for us to do it, and we can do it without that uncertainty. If that, I don't know if that's possible, but if so, I think that could be an effective way to do it. Yeah. Councillor Smage.
I can never observe quietly. I'm really sorry. Just 2 quick questions, actually. Accessibility of sites, because obviously timescales will be elongated as far as that is concerned, I take it. One of the things that you can't do at the minute is if you have a sudden change in circumstances, you can't get on the garden waste scheme if you're not already on it when it starts for the season. So if we're not going to be doing anything about our accessibility of sites for a little while, can we look at how people, if their circumstances do change and they can't now get to the sites for the garden waste, how they can join the garden scheme during a season, especially if there's already a lorry going past the end of their drive or along their street because there are other garden waste. So it's not going to be a cost necessarily to the council, but in actual fact it is maybe preventing contamination of other bins because somebody just quite clearly can't get to the tip at that time. And also, can I ask about your period dignity scheme and why that is over 5 years and why that's not at this moment in time, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Smage. I'll hand straight over to you guys for that.
Yeah, we can look at that. What we perhaps need to link to and perhaps make people more aware of is the fact that we do provide free bulky waste collections, a limited number for people who are on our assisted collection list. So they're people who aren't able to place their own bin out, and therefore it's reasonable to expect that they aren't able to attend the household waste site themselves. So it may be that we look at something on how that's linked for people who become vulnerable, can no longer access the site, and therefore can dispose of garden waste through our bulky waste facility. So we can take that away and look at that. In terms of sort of period dignity, I think we'll pick that up because I think there's a point you're making there about current environment, current circumstances some people may find themselves in terms of cost of living. In building up what was the programme and what was the scheduling, there was a number of workshops that we ran in looking at actually what's our capacity, what funding may be available today, what's already in track, etc. But I think we'll take that one away and look at that one.
Thank you very much, Will. We've got Councillor Bamford.
Thank you very much. Thank you for presenting your report. We hear a lot about contamination at source. Has any thought been given to actually sorting it at the other end? Have we got a system? What constitutes a contaminated load? Is it a load that's got one disposable nappy in it, or is it what percentage do we take as being contaminated? Can we not sort it out at the other end? Another point is that we talk about the upfront costs for food collection, glass collection, etc. Is there any chance of outsourcing that to? Are there any businesses that would be interested in taking that basically finance? That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Will.
You're sick in area, me, so what? Yeah. Contamination. In order to sort it at the facility, you need a very specific type of materials recycling facility that's designed for that. You see a lot of skip companies have things like that that's quite robust, it's quite mechanical. Our facility is not suitable for that. You know, there is some automation, but it's predominantly people on picking belts, hand picking things out. So that's why, you know, it's quite limited. It is potential. We have had some initial discussions with our disposal provider about alternative facilities, but they come at a cost. And so it's simply we either pay a cost to dispose of it over there, when actually probably if we stop it at source, we pay no cost. So that's why we're not particularly keen on just shipping out the issue to recover it. There was a period where we had secured some capacity as an energy product in cement kiln, etc. But that market became very competitive, and again, that was a cost that we couldn't meet anymore. But it's something that we'll continually keep under review. You know, this is something that our team are very passionate about, deal with every day. It's incredibly frustrating for them, as a number of the panel members is as well. So it is something we continue to look at. But ultimately, it's about minimising what goes into the vehicle at the start. In terms of what is contamination, well, obviously we produce a lot of material on what is, but some of the most difficult things are food waste, nappies, because if you imagine if it goes into the back of a collection vehicle, that is a compaction vehicle. So it's like putting it into Play-Doh. It squidges through, it goes across everything. It especially gets into the fibres of paper and card, which make it completely unrecyclable. So there is, you know, very basic things we ask our teams to look at. You know, is there a black bag? If there's a black bag, it's contaminated because we don't know what's in that bag. Does it smell? Because normally if there's food waste in there at large volume, there's a smell. Does the load come out, and you might laugh at this, like a sausage, you know? Because if it's nice, clean material that's recyclable, it flows out, you know, it falls out of the back of the vehicle. If it comes out just in a lump, it's got something in there that squished it all together. So we try to simplify that so that when the crews are looking in, they can log it, and when we're tipping at the Suez halls, they can see that come out. We do work with them to recover part loads. You know, so we're not saying that just because the front 20% has high contamination, then 80% is fine. We just put it all away. They pull out with the grab what they can to recycle it. Because again, that's product for Suez. There's an income stream into that they're expecting as well. So we're doing as much as we can in that terms. Ultimately, we're sort of circling back to the issue of stopping it at the curbside.
I've got two final questions that I forgot to ask earlier, so I'll go for those. And if anyone else has got any quick fire questions, please we'll do them now. This will be the last round of questions because we'll need to progress on to the next item. But the two that I forgot to ask earlier were about the on-street recycling, the 80% contamination. What does that mean for us in terms of handling that? Because it's so high, does that mean that basically everything isn't being able to be recycled? Is it just that one bin that then is thrown in the general waste, or is the entire, you know, whatever van's collecting those bins, are we seeing a genuine benefit from that, or is this a trial that is showing us that perhaps it's not the best investment for us in the short term at least? And then the second question from me was just what you're really good that the reuse shop extra donation points are being talked about, not trying to bring it down to a ward level, but in the Denberdale patch, since we've got all three of us here. For example, we recently had a Salvation Army container put at the Tesco Express, which has quite a high volume, and that is getting, it's only been there for like 2 weeks or something, but it's getting filled very quickly. Are we thinking about doing things like that, particularly in our rural areas that perhaps aren't, near the reuse shop, or would have to be a bit more of a journey to get to where our existing donation points are? And then I'll just bring up, before you come in, Councillor McLaughlin also had a quick question, and then we'll conclude this item.
Yeah, a quick fire question. It might sound silly, but it's about the glass trials. On the slides, there was a picture of what looked like a hefty bag, which said glass only. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong because I wasn't around at the time, but my understanding was one of the reasons why the previous glass collecting we had in Kirklees had to stop was because it was in a box and it involved heavy lifting. So I'm just curious what role that bag is playing in the trial, and if it's going to have to be lifted by our collection teams regularly, is that going to potentially be a problem with our trade unions and our health and safety team?
Thank you. This is the last round of answers, and then we'll move on. So over to you.
The finish line's nearly there, isn't it? That's for residents to decant. So on the trial, we had communal bins that residents could sort of put that in their house, take it down, decant it in. So it wasn't intended that was ever the collection method. On litter recycling, no, there's no way to recover that percentage. What we were having were teams sorting through the material. So there was some recycling, but in reality, under normal operation, we wouldn't be able to recover that. We ran a number of different scenarios. We ran sort of cold scenarios where the bin was just placed. Let's see what happens. We ran scenarios where we put signage in there that was ridiculously large to see what happened. And we ran scenarios where our teams coordinated going into the school, running education campaigns and then seeing what happened. There was contamination that was high on all of them, but some of the lowest ones we saw were where it was quite rural, so difficult for the public to access it as well, and where we ran education programs. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but there's a long way to go before we really want to invest and look at that, which is why we're sort of looking at what that next phase might be and might look like. Is there something in parks? Is there something in other locations that we can explore? And reuse shop, at the moment we're concentrating on household waste sites and expanding into household waste sites. I think some initial concerns on putting other uncontrolled areas would be that it's just simply a site for fly tipping. We could see that being abused potentially in some of these rural areas, so there's no plans at the moment to do some of these mini bring sites as there may be. We want an officer there that's able to look to see what's going in there, to make sure it's the right thing, to make sure it can be repaired, reused, whatever it needs to be. Phase 3 potentially. So.
Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion. Did you want to come in? Sorry, Graham. We've heard enough from you. But I think that's been a really, really interesting discussion. So thank you very much, everyone, for contributing. I'm sure you've taken all of it on board. I think one thing that's come through loud and clear is frustration about contamination across party. But I'll show you we're taking everything on board as well as that. So are we all happy to move on to the next item? Excellent. Thank you, everyone. The next item is the Snow Wardens Volunteer Scheme, which is presented by Nick Jenkins. I'll hand over to Nick.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. I'll just let that load up. So just before we kick off, there's just two clarifications from the report you received. On page 74, there's a spelling mistake in officer recommendations, and that has taken the word from not to now, which does slightly change the tone of the report. And just to clarify, the 100 that are discussed are 100 in year 2, so that's on top of the Snow Wardens we currently have. Just to clarify, that is in the presentation, but just so you're aware before we go in. And now we'll get into it. So what is the Snow Warden scheme? So the scheme is a volunteer scheme, which we began last year, so this is just a year 2 part trial update, where we give residents across Kirklees grit. We give them equipment, so a shovel and a shaker, and PPE in the form of a high-vis jacket and some shoe grips, and just allow them to clear snow from residential areas. These are areas that we'd never grit. So we're looking at cul-de-sacs, car parks, churchyards, for example, areas that help connect the community back to our main gritting routes, where they can catch public transport, for example. It's a fully flexible scheme, so residents have contacts should they have any issues, but we're able to decide how much time they dedicate to the scheme. So they might do evenings. We've had some people who have done full days, and they choose their own hours and their locations of work. So we've had people go right up from where they live right into town centres. We've had people just do their estates or their streets. It's completely up to the residents on what they would like to do. So just a quick year 1 in review. So we had 27 wardens signed up across 9 wards, and it is worth mentioning that we had originally capped year 1 at 40, because this was also a trial for us internally to work out how we were going to run the scheme. It was a cost of £39.77p per kit, and that included our delivery as well. And we delivered 1 grit to each warden at the beginning of the season, and we had no further requests. Actually, we had quite a mild winter, so the initial 10 kilograms was enough grit. We had really positive feedback from the wardens, although we did receive recommendations on a change to equipment, which I'll run through later on. We adopted a councillor first application process, and that was through the ward meetings. So that allowed councillors to go directly to their residents, or we could contact areas that councillors identified as their main areas of issue. And we had kit delivery times of around a week. So we let people sign up throughout all the winter and deliver kits within a week on average, with the exception of over the Christmas period. So our year 2 recommendations, I'm having to look up here because it's very small on my laptop and I haven't thought this through. So year 2, so we'll begin direct-to-resident comms this year. So we'll use Gritter Twitter, which was extremely successful as a channel over winter. And that's to look to attract more residents to the scheme. So this year's all about working out how we're going to scale the scheme upwards. As part of that, we will lift the volunteer limit to a further 100 across the district on top of the 27. We have already got a waiting list as well. And that will allow us to actually bulk order stock, and that brings the cost down by a third. So quite a heavy reduction in the cost there. We're going to remove the shaker from the resident kit and replace it with a scoop. Residents mentioned that the shaker was just a bit too heavy when it was filled with a kilogram of grit and they were shaking it. So we're changing that to a scoop. But we're also going to increase the initial grit volume from 10 kilograms to 30 kilograms. So the grit is actually the cheapest part of the kit. It only costs us a few more pounds to do that, and it does then save on delivery if we have to go back out. And it doesn't go off so they can use it the next year. And we'll also move to a collection first model to decrease delivery costs and allow more training with volunteers. We used about 5 full officer days in delivering out 29 kits last year. So we're going to open the depots for 2 days, one in the north, one in the south for collection. And then those residents who can't necessarily come collect, who don't drive, we will do a couple of delivery days. But that is mainly just to reduce our officer cost. And then what this will look like at the end of year 2. So come when the winter season ends in April, we will be followed by a month of volunteer engagement. So we're going to do surveys, we're going to do focus groups and go out and meet those out in the district who've done this, with an aim to take any final feedback and recommendations from them. We'll then produce our final report in July of next year. We'll include a full cost analysis and ROI, and also the future options on how we would look to expand the scheme fully to a district-wide scheme within the highways service as part of our winter provision. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour there.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for all the work you've done on the scheme. I know you've really led it, so it's much appreciated. John was first in with his virtual hand, and I've seen Councillor McLaughlin as well, so anyone else please indicate and I'll add you to the list. John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Nick. I was a great supporter of this, and I'm kind of disappointed we only got 2 in Kirkburton in the first year, because I did my best to promote it, and I will do again this year. My ask really is around the comms that we do. Can we try and have that sounds wrong saying try, but can we have a consistent approach to comms, both the comms that the council does, the stuff that we put on Gritter Twitter, if we can have some social media comms that we can also share. And then I wonder whether it's worth having available, if they're requested from councillors, to have something that they can hand out when they're doing whatever it may be, surgeries or visiting shows or that sort of thing. And I know that all of the agricultural shows I've been at this summer, our recycling champions are there, and it's great, and they have a wonderful stall, and they do engage with people. I wonder whether we ought to be promoting this as well in a similar way, maybe even sharing a stall, to be honest. But you know, it's another way to get that message out there, and particularly the agricultural shows where you've got your farmers and people in the more rural areas who are less likely to have their roads treated, and also possibly the people that are a bit more self-reliant because they have to be, may be more willing to step forward and volunteer. So it's a suggestion really. Other than that, you know, fully supportive, as you well know. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. I'll just bring Councillor McLaughlin in as well, and then we'll answer those questions. Then I can see Councillor Lowe has indicated to make a comment as well. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you for coming back. I remember the previous presentation. If by memory, I think you modelled some of our equipment, you know, personally, which was very entertaining. There are just a few questions. How many of our volunteers actually used their kit? Because it was a mild winter, and I did wonder how much of an impact that would have on this as a trial of severe weather equipment, and what impact you think that had. And also, just in the report, page 73, 3.6, financial implications for people living or working in Kirklees, NA. Presumably we're ordering more kit, so there is some kind of financial implication that should probably be included in the report. And no, again, thank you for the work that went into this, and I'm glad it was at least partially successful, and I hope that it is going forward. Gritter Twitter remains a roaring success, although I don't think we should call it Gritter X going forward, because that sounds like something you don't want to be caught Googling in Parliament, isn't it? So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Excellent, Matthew. So we've got John's points around comms, socials and print, stalls at events, and then Matthew about the use of them and financial elements. Thanks.
Perfect, yeah. So in terms of the comms, we are currently working with our comms colleagues to create a pack for councillors. So that will include a one-pager of just the basic facts that you'll need to know, as well as the logo to be used on social media posts, some text that we use on social media, a few different options as well. We're currently working with them on that, so I will look at the handouts as well, and a bit more of the social media guidance as well, but there will be a full, I suppose, cheat sheet of what you can put out there, and obviously we'd ask people to retweet what we put out there and repost, etc. as well. That's currently being formed, so I will look at the handouts. And then in terms of promotion through events, I don't really see that being a problem. It's not something that, to be honest, we had thought about, but I don't see that really being an issue. And as I say, the departments work quite closely together anyway. There's no reason that we couldn't have a presence where we have recycling champions anyway. So I don't necessarily see that being an issue at all. Those packs, by the way, I should just add, we're hoping to get those out towards the back end of September before we open. So you should kind of see them land in the next 4 weeks or so. You should receive a pack as well, and then obviously can ask any questions on that too as they come to you. In terms of how many volunteers we use, we had feedback from 20 that they did use their kits. We don't know whether the other ones did or did not. They just did not respond. We will be going all back out to them in the next 2 weeks or so to make sure they're all happy to continue to be snow wardens and make sure they've got enough grit before we redeliver it. We may get some more feedback then as well. And that's always something we can include in the cheat sheet as well. And let you know how many people actually went out, because although we did have quite a mild winter, we had a couple of snowy events and a lot of rural volunteers. And then in terms of financial implications, we're not yet known yet, which is why we delayed it. It probably wasn't the best response. That's something that we're going to look at in the final review of the cost analysis on how much that would actually cost us to run at a scheme. So NA probably wasn't the best answer, but we're not 100% sure on the cost implications yet until the end of the trial.
Thanks, Nick. Gwen for a brief comment, and then we'll go to Gary.
Brief comment, my apologies to Councillor Till and Councillor Smith earlier. I will try and condense. I love this scheme. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I love your Gritter Twitter. I agree with Councillor Till about promoting the snow wardens. Marketing, I don't know, the change of the name, I've looked at other authorities and they've got like snow angels or snow champions. John, if you want to dress up as a Wolverhampton Wolf, because they actually have mascots to help promote the snow warden scheme at community events, so maybe that might work as well. So, but I think it's an excellent scheme. I'd just like to see actual real comments from people who actually are doing it. You say you've got positive feedback. I'd like to see what the actual comments are. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. That's a good point. When utilising the feedback that we've already had when promoting it, it'll be very good. Gary.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a real positive here. I actually think there's a lot more people doing this than perhaps you're aware. I know on my own street there's a grit bin at the bottom. It's a steep hill. Nothing ever goes down there but cars skidding past. And I know that every time there's snow, I get out there with my own equipment. A few neighbours do, so I suspect there's lots and lots and lots of people who do this. And I might well sign up if it stops me having to get a bucket and put holes in the bottom and all that to DIY equipment. But yeah, there are a lot of people there who, if they're new, I think, say, they could contact somebody and get some equipment to do it properly. I think there'd be lots and lots of people quite interested. So yeah, I'm about 20 metres from Bradford Road, so sometimes I can be completely stranded and I can see the road just down there, but I just can't do it. So yeah, so I think there'll be lots of more people doing it than perhaps you imagine. But, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And in terms of, you talked about now doing sort of direct to resident contact. Obviously, we've got a lot of people on sort of the council's email list and signed up for my Kirklees. Is that sort of the route one that we're going down to speak directly to people in terms of picking up those people that Gary's talking about?
So in terms of direct, we're going to use Gritter Twitter and we're going to utilise the website and then use our community networks as much as possible. So working through active citizens as well to try and get out there. We're not doing any direct to resident yet because we are still capping this at 100. And we just need to make sure we don't want to turn too many people away, but we are still in a trial. So that will be something that we'll look at the end of the trial about how we will promote it. But hopefully it will become an uncapped service that residents can can sign up for. So, but we won't do any direct through email at this side of it, but we will hopefully get a bit of a name out for ourselves, and we have got a nice logo now, so fingers crossed.
Thanks, Nick. Graham.
Yeah, uncapped is a little bit of a wide statement. We will have to manage that, Nick. In my former life in another authority, you know, we got to that stage, and you turn around and before you know it, you've got 500, 600 people. Then the trick is making sure that they are using the equipment in the appropriate way and they're safe. So we'll do it in a managed way. Nick's done a tremendous piece of work on snow wardens. I would like to see more community groups as well coming forward. You know, I mean, you made reference to yourself and your neighbours. Arguably a community group might be an area that we'd like to see some engagement. If there are, you know, small villages that have got that type of bond already. And I'm also very, very keen to hear from any of our parish councils. I know there are minimal in our borough, but again, a call to arms for those if they want to participate in what is an essential service when the white stuff falls. Okay.
Thanks, Graham. Any other members got any questions or comments on this item? No? Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thanks for all the work that you're doing on this. That takes us on to the final item on the agenda, which is the work programme. Does anyone have any comments or changes they'd like to make to the work programme? Councillor McLaughlin.
No, just as suggested, under items not yet scheduled, we've got fleet replacement down there. And I wondered if it would probably have been best paired with the presentation today, but we also have waste procurement coming up in November. I wonder if it could potentially be coupled with that, because while the Kirklees fleet is much more than waste, the waste fleet is a big part of it.
Graham, could we bring those together? Yep. Excellent. Nice point. Thank you, Matthew. Anyone else? Going, gone. Thank you very much, everyone. It's nice to see you all. John, we hope you get better soon. Thank you for joining despite not feeling 100%. And we'll close the meeting now. Thanks, everyone.